Hey guys, Louise here with Red Pointy Dog Training, and today we're back with episode number 7, and it's a really good one. We're going to be discussing 3 ways we can help our reactive or sensitive dogs to feel better. Now, we've discussed how in order to improve a dog's behavior, we first need to address their emotional state. Well, today I'm sharing the 3 ways we can do just that. Now, before we get started, I need your help. I want to know how I can help you and your dog. Do you have a question that I can answer? A thought you'd like to talk more about, or maybe you just want some feedback about your own dog? I would love to hear from you. Head to the description below and find the link for our suggestion box. Okay, great. Let's get to today's episode. So, the first way that we can help our dogs to feel better about their triggers is by rebuilding their associations. Now, every one of your dogs, if they're reactive or sensitive, they already feel a certain way about their triggers. Now, triggers are anything that causes your dog to feel reactive or to feel uncomfortable. Okay, so for many dogs, that could be seeing another dog, a person visiting the house, a delivery driver, those kinds of things. So if your dog currently feels, let's say, nervous, anxious, or even afraid, or maybe they're just frustrated, none of those things cause your dog to behave well, right? So we're seeing some behaviors that are a result of your dog feeling this way. And we want them to behave differently. So we need to help them feel better. And so by doing this, we can start to change the association from, let's just say, fearful to neutral, or anxious to calm, or frustrated to relaxed. So it could be any number of things. And what we move to depends on your dog. For me, with my clients, I strive for neutrality. So if a dog is afraid, I'd rather them just feel neutral about that trigger. If a dog is anxious, I'd rather them just feel neutral. Okay. Because if we can get to neutrality, then we have room to grow from there. But that's usually my first base point. So, how do we rebuild associations? It depends on the dog. If you've ever talked to a dog trainer, then you know that it depends is our favorite response because it really does depend. In many of my cases, we rebuild associations by teaching the dog to associate looking at a trigger with getting a treat from mom or dad. So we call this the look at that game. If you want more information, tell me down below in the comments. I'd be happy to give you some more. And there's a lot more to this, and that'll be kind of included in the other pieces of this today. But if we can teach our dog that every time this trigger is present, a piece of food comes for them from you, not from the scary trigger, then over time we can slowly start to improve how they're feeling. Now, I work with some dogs who they like food, but boy, do they love a tennis ball. And so as part of our foundation training, we teach them a marker signal that means they can anticipate tugging on a toy or chasing a ball. We always do a ball on a tether because balls go crazy. You've seen them. They go running into the road. So we can say something like good or yes to teach the dog to anticipate some toy play when they see or recognize something that maybe is triggering. Now, one of the other things we're going to talk about as in our next piece is that you can't just be shoulder to shoulder with a trigger and give your dog food or give your dog a toy. So we're kind of teasing that out as a separate piece. But for right now, I want you to be thinking about my dog feels this way and I want them to feel a different way. What does the dog like? And this is the key here. What does the dog enjoy? And how can we use that in a way that your dog can begin to feel a different way or have a different, more neutral or even positive association to that trigger that makes them feel, let's just say, negative. And I want you to remember that progress isn't linear. So if you have a dog who is afraid of, let's just say, other dogs, right? And your dog sees a dog and you give them chicken every day, and every day they see a dog, they get chicken and it's going great. That does not mean that you're going to go from point A to point B and it's going to be quick and fast and easy. What this process takes is kind of like hiking a mountain. I don't know if any of you guys are hikers, but if you're not, sometimes when you look up, it looks like you're almost at the summit. You're almost there. As Jake would say, just 15 more minutes. Don't ask Jake how much time is left on a hike. Okay, hot tip. But it looks like you're at the summit, And you get there and you realize this is just a lookout point. You're just on the shoulder. And now you can see what looks like the next summit. And you're like, okay, quick snack. I can get there. We can do this. But it was just a false peak and you're not even there yet. You got like 3 more miles to go. So you're still getting there. You're still closer than you were when you started, but you still got work to do. And so that's what training with sensitive dogs is like. You're always moving forward. You're moving in the right direction, but sometimes it's a little forward and you slow down, a little forward and you slow down. Maybe take a step back because progress isn't linear. It's like a squiggly line all over the place, and that's normal. So if we're going from something that's negative and we're trying to make it positive, it's especially kind of like a diverging path, right? It's not just that direct line. So remember that when you're starting to work with your dog, that it's not going to be really simple because you're training an animal that has their own preconceived notions. They have their own life experience. They have their own genetic makeup. They have their own baggage, and that changes how they learn and how they behave. So rebuilding associations, think, what does your dog like? What do they enjoy? And how can you capitalize on that? And teaching your dog to associate a trigger with getting that fun or tasty thing from you. Now, the second piece we can help dogs to feel better is with pattern games. You have definitely heard me talk about pattern games before, but predictability is the best counterweight to anxiety and frustration. They're kind of the same thing in a lot of cases. So when a dog doesn't know what to expect, they can worry about it. They can be nervous about it. They can be afraid of it. Many of you guys know I just got back from a trip, and flying on an airplane was not a good time for me. I was really scared. But that first flight, as scary as it was okay. I survived. And the second flight, my body was just like, this is fine, because it's going to be exactly the same as it was before. I had that predictability. I knew what to expect. And now we can't always promise that the environment is going to be the same, but what we can guarantee for our dogs is that your response is going to be the same. What happens with the dog is going to be the same, and what happens after is going to be the same. So I always use the car example because it's something we experience every day. When Piper sees a car, I tell her, hey, Piper, there's a car coming. Let's pull over. We move to the side of the road, we sit and we play the 1, 2, 3 game, or we walk by depending on which side of the road the vehicle is on. It's the same every time. Even if there's 3 cars. Oh, there's a car. Let's pull over. Oh, here comes another car. Let's move off the road. Oh, and one more. Here we go. I'm just narrating for her. I'm telling her what to expect, and we're moving over, we're sitting, we're doing 1, 2, 3, or we're walking and doing 1, 2, 3. It's got to be the same every time. Personally, as a human who struggles with anxiety, I find having a protocol to be really helpful. Oh, there's a dog. This is what we're going to do. Or, oh, here's a car. Here's what we're going to do. Our protocol for when we see a dog on our walks is we do an emergency U-turn. So we immediately get to higher ground. We put distance between my dog and the other dog, and then we pull over and we do look at that, or we do 1, 2, 3, which are pretty similar pattern games as well. But just by having a predictable pattern, you're going to do the same thing every time. You're going to take a lot of the stress off of your dog and yourself because you're going to have the same thing to do every single time. So some of the pattern games I like to do are the 1, 2, 3 game. If you've not done the 1, 2, 3 game, if you comment down below that you're interested, I'll get you my free lesson plan so you can get started with that. We teach our dogs to associate the sound of you counting to 3 with them getting a treat. It is so simple, you guys, and so powerful. We can use it in many, many different ways. Another game is up down. If you don't follow us over on Instagram, head over and check us out. I posted a reel recently about how to practice the up down game. It's so simple. We're just teaching the dog to take a treat off the ground and then make eye contact. But then we can add another layer into that of the dog saying, I see a dog, now I make eye contact. I see a dog, now I make eye contact. And we can reinforce that choice, that pattern, that behavior, and the dog knows this is what I'm doing. I do it every time. It's exactly the same. 1, 2, 3, up, down. Those are the 2 pattern games I use the most. There are other pattern games that I use a lot as well, like Super Bowls and Latte. Those are just a few of them, but they're a little bit more complicated and a little harder to apply in your day-to-day scenario. So for you and your dog, I want you to be thinking, what's a pattern you can create for them? What is a trigger scenario? Like maybe a delivery driver coming? And what's a pattern you can enact that helps take some of the stress off your dog? Whether it's, oh, the Amazon driver's here, let's emergency recall into the other room with a kibble scatter and the door closed. If you do that every single time, I promise your dog is going to start to feel better and create a better, more neutral or even positive association. All right. And the third thing that we can do to help our dog feel better and therefore behave better around their triggers is with gradual exposure. Now, the first thing we talked about was rebuilding association. And the second thing we talked about was pattern games. And so the third thing being gradual exposure brings it all together like a nice, neat little package. Because you can't do pattern games without gradual exposure. And you can't rebuild associations without gradual exposure. They all work together. And so if I'm afraid of spiders and you put a spider in my lap and say, here's a cookie, Louise, I don't feel good, right? Instead, I'm going to lose trust in the person who put the spider on me. And I maybe don't like ice cream anymore because it reminds me of this scary thing that happened to me before with spiders. Now, that's a silly example, but that's actually how it works. In order to help our dogs feel better, we need to use gradual exposure to slowly introduce them to things over time at the dog's pace, not your pace, not my pace, not your neighbor's pace, at your dog's pace. And so gradual exposure can look like a lot of different things depending on the trigger that we're talking about for your individual dog. If your dog is nervous about cars, then gradual exposure to cars may be training in a parking lot where you can be 50 yards away from any moving vehicles. It may be training right at the, beginning of your driveway while you have a spouse drive by really slowly. Because speed is something to consider as well when we're talking about exposure. Because normal speed would be regular exposure, not gradual. And so with gradual, we want to go nice and slow. So we're thinking distance, we're thinking intensity. Those are the two key things here. We want more distance and we want low intensity. And then as your dog starts to feel better and they are building a positive association, you're implementing those pattern games and your dog is feeling great about being 50 yards away. That's just a ballpark number, right? It could be anything for your own individual dog because remember, it depends. So as they get better, we go closer and then we go closer and then we go closer and we go closer and we go closer and we go closer. And eventually you're at a normal distance to your dog's triggers. But it depends on the intensity of that trigger. So let's say you're walking your dog and you see somebody walking an adolescent golden retriever on a retractable leash, and they're bounding around. They're a happy-go-lucky dog, carefree, but so is the owner. Maybe they're not paying as much attention to the dog. That dog is high intensity. So even if they have a great distance from your dog, it may be more triggering, and that might not be enough to have that gradual exposure for your individual dog. So you may need to be thinking about, how do I start? What does like day one look like for your dog's training? And it may be starting with a friend who has a dog who's neutral or old and can just sit and be a dog and not worry about things. Or if your dog is nervous about bicycles, have a friend be 2 roads down, just standing on a bike. It's not moving. And you're far away trying to do a pattern game, trying to have your dog play that look at that game, right? Trying to use all these tools to help your dog feel better. We need that gradual exposure. And remember, like I said before, progress is not linear. So you might go closer to the trigger. The trigger may get a little more intense, but then your dog may get uncomfortable and you have to back off a little bit. That's great. You know why? Because it builds your dog's resilience. And I want you to remember this one thing. If you're distracted or you've tuned me out, come back to me. Okay, it is not whether or not your dog reacts that is your measure of success. It is how quickly they recover. Let's say that again. It is not whether or not your dog reacts that is your measure of success. It is how quickly they recover when they do. We're all going to have situations where our dogs react. even if your dog isn't reactive, even if you don't consider your dog to be sensitive or reactive. Dogs sometimes overreact. I do too. Don't tell my husband. And so it's not whether or not they do that that is a success or a failure. It's how quickly they recover. I want my dog to say, hey, I'm uncomfortable about this. Do something about it. Okay, cool. And move on and not hang on to that stress long term because that's not healthy. Okay. So let's recap really quick. So today we talked about rebuilding associations, pairing something negative with something positive to try and get neutrality. We talked about using pattern games as a way to counteract some anxiety or some of that worry that also, in case you didn't realize, rebuilds associations as well. And then we talked about gradual exposure, which can be done with rebuilding associations and pattern games in a way to help improve how your dog feels, to really address their emotional state and improve their behavior over time. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you guys learned something. Please tell your dog I said hello, and I'll see you again next time. Bye for now.